welcome everyone who is listening here to us on your devices and computer screens. This is the Write Right Podcast, your weekly pep talk on living the writing life. I am Elon.
I'm John.
And I'm Craig.
And today I'm feeling weird. It might be this caffeinated beverage. But today we're going to be talking about one of the greatest questions in all of the online writing community, and that is plotting versus pantsing. Most of you listening will know what this is, but just because we have to, let's define plotting versus pantsing. Do either of you have a good, concise definition for this?
Well, I would just say simply plotting is when you figure out what you're going to write before you write it, and pantsing is when you have no idea and you jump in and you just make it up as you go.
Awesome. So this has a bunch of different names. They're architects versus gardeners, outliners versus discovery writers. There's a million different ways of talking about this sort of duality.
Yeah.
Whatever, that's what they call it.
I think duality is a good term.
This duality of writers. But I think that many of us sort of fall somewhere on the spectrum in between. I know I am definitely a pantser in my habits, and I'm trying to become a plotter. How about you guys?
I used to be very much on the plotting end of things, but I've moved in the total opposite direction into pantsing. I still have some idea. I do a lot of short story writing, and with a lot of short stories, I have the title in my mind, and that's what I start with, and that's what I run with. For the thriller novel that I'm working on, I have 3 or 4 plot points that I know I have to hit at some point, but I don't know how I'm getting there. I'm going to figure that out. I used to never write like that, but now it seems to be my regular method.
And I'm looking at my notes here, and I see that I'm a panther. So when I sit down and I write, I sit and I kind of stalk with my hands over the keyboard, and I wait. And I wait until the story comes, and then I type and I pounce on it.
Are you just justifying a typo?
I guess. I make it right. I'm a pantser. No, I kind of went to different ends. I have tried my hand at a novel 4 times now, and I've worked through revisions of these various novels over the last 10 years. And initially complete pantser. Well, I had no idea what I was doing. I just started writing and this didn't fall apart, I'll keep writing. And it did fall apart, but I got so far in that I kept writing. As I went through, I realized I need to get some sense of structure. So I did study a bit of story structure and plotting techniques, tried that out. Well, that was a disaster too, because I had all the fittings, but I had no sense of what story is and how to discover a story. So actually the novel I'm working on right now is a second draft with some knowledge I've gained, but initially it was a pure outline that I was kind of doing it like a paint by numbers, and there was just some awful stuff that just didn't work. And some parts were great, but some parts were terrible, because here I get to this scene that I had outlined, and I'm stuck filling it all in because it was in the outline, and I didn't want to mess it up. So anyway, the second draft for me has been very much just treating it like I don't know anything. The previous manuscript is there. I might hit some notes. I might get inspired, but for the most part, I tend to discovery write, and I love that. The freedom to know that whatever you're about to write, you don't have to stick with what's there. You can use it as a guide, but not. So I guess I'm somewhere in between now. I've come to see that plotting, pantsing, they're just different approaches to writing. And as a writer, you can hybridize and experiment and try different things.
Yeah, there's no correct way to write. And I think that's something that a lot of different writing resources and famous writers and writing podcasts like our own say. These techniques, there's no true, with a capital T, way to write a story. Stories have patterns, and people sort of extract different ways of describing how to recreate those patterns with different contents. But some of the Some of the best known writers in the world are plotters, others are pantsers. Famous mystery writers are pantsers, which is remarkable. What is it? Is Agatha Christie the one who wrote all those mysteries?
She wrote
yeah.
a lot. I mean, that could be who you're thinking of.
I might be misremembering this from writing excuses, but I believe that these whodunit novels where someone was the killer, she didn't know who the killer was the entire time she was writing, which empowered her to make everyone believable, to every single one of these red herrings and options totally believable, because even she didn't know until the very end, which is tremendously risky, because it might fall flat. But then she would, retroactively fit in, make sure that the right kinds of red herrings were there. But like as she wrote the first draft, she didn't know who did it. And how exciting is that? You're like, oh man, I'm finding out as I'm writing. But so this notion of hybridizing is very popular. I'm part of a Slack group from people that I met at a local convention here, and I was sort of picking their brains about outlining, and I got a lot of different input because everyone does it so differently. But one of the things that occurred to me while I was getting fantastic feedback from this group was that plotting is just short form pantsing. Like when you're writing an outline, when you're putting down your plot, you're discovery writing that plot. Like it depends on at what stage you're just doing the discovery writing. Like if you want to do more upfront, more planning, so that you know what you're going to write about and you know what point A, B, C, D, E, F, and G are, or if you want to only know what points A and B are, or A, B, and C, like that's where the variation happens, because we're all discovery writers at some point and we're all plotters at some point. Like people say plantsing, but while we were setting up this episode, I discovered that you can also say plotzing, which as a Jewish guy with Yiddish a background, I'm like, yeah, plotzing. Let's do that. Love it so much. I'm just so happy.
Well, I defined panther, so are you going to define plotzing?
Plotzing, plots is a Yiddish word for, like, if I'm not mistaken, please someone tweet at me if I'm wrong. It's like I'm overcome, I'm going to like burst. Plots can mean I'm going to burst because I've eaten too much, or like I'm plotzing because something's too stressful, or I'm plotzing because I'm very excited about something. Like I'm going to plots it's a very like Crown Heights grandmother thing to say. And it's also now how I identify as a writer. So if you have any questions, feel free to direct them at Grandma Elon, at Bonbon Elon on the Twitters. But yeah, so like there's a million techniques, and I think you hit the nail on the head, John. It's pick and choose. It's do a lot of research, do a lot of learning, find out what kinds of things inspire you creatively. I watched a fantastic video about the circular plot structure that Dan Harmon follows. Dan Harmon created Community, also created Rick and Morty. He's a fairly well-known storyteller these days, and I love his work. And seeing the way that he approached the story structure, like you can break it down so that it perfectly follows this, like the Joseph Campbell Hero with a Thousand Faces, that whole archetype. It's just another way of looking at the same structure. But the way that it was described, I felt was particularly effective and really resonated with me. So I plucked a little bit of that wisdom out and I threw it into my brain, and then I took something else from somewhere else, and I took something else from somewhere else, and I'm just building for myself the kind of plotzer that I want to be. Meow.
Oh, we have a visitor.
We have a guest host. So what do you do? What do you do? I know that we've like talked about it, but like what have there been any techniques that have resonated with you in particular?
Go first.
Cause like we've all acknowledged, we kind of fall in between plotting and pantsing. My style that I tend to do is I plan the next 3 steps, and then I get through them, and then I plan the next 3 steps after that. So it's sort of plotting as I go along, which responds to an element of pantsing, I guess. I don't know. What I do seems to work.
I model my method a lot after how I strategize for chess, because I approach story a lot like a chess game. The game will change with every move, so there's no point in planning the whole thing out. What I tend to do is I do short term, long term. This is particular to my process because I write every day, and when I stop writing, I try to leave myself right in the middle of where I have to pick it up again. So I actually will leave a sentence incomplete or something like that. And I set a timer, so I usually know that I'm on my last couple minutes, and that's when I know that, okay, I'm going to be tying ends off for the day. So I often will leave some notes for myself, but I have like things that are going to, I know that this is where I've got to go next when I pick this up. And it might cover into the scene I'm working on. But then what I do is I also have long term. So I know that this is happening some point, a couple scenes down the road, or this little thing has to happen here. And I tend to chuck my notes there. But none of them are like written in stone. They're more just like reminders. These are all the balls in the air. Just when you're writing, don't forget about this. And I tend to, when I write, I spend time looking ahead, looking through notes, looking back through other chapters as I get jogged, and then looking at what I'm writing. And I tend to alternate, and I find that is a great thing to do if I have writer's block, because I'm sitting there for 2 hours, and eventually something comes if I'm in a tough spot. So that tends to be my process. I mean, I definitely would say I'm a plotter, but I'm not a blind plotter. It's a very there's a lot of discovery that is sort of come into my process, and it's very much reacting to the story and how the story is evolving.
Yeah, one thing that happened over and over again as I was getting this sort of like deluge of feedback in that Slack group that I mentioned was mentions that said something to the effect of, "You are not a prisoner of your outline." And I think that that's one of the fears that settled in with me as I looked at the daunting task of plotting a novel. Like, oh man, like what if this is my plan for the story and it doesn't go there? Like even saying it out loud sounds kind of silly, but it was an honest feeling that I had. Like, oh man, I've got this piece that I've been working on for way too long, and I know more or less where I want it to end, and I know more or less how I want certain beats to take place. But every time I sit down to write, it starts to just like veer off in a crazy direction. And it's made me nervous to the point where I've stopped working on it, because I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to wrangle this back in. And this is something that we could probably talk about for an entire other episode, like write your way out of these problems and write through the issue and go back and fix it later. But like, just keep pushing forward. There was a novel project I was working on that I completely lost the thread of what my plan was, and then I realized that something needed to change, and I just changed it and knew that I would go back and just like retrofit the beginning chapters as I needed to later. But just like, if I went back and tried to repair the first 5 chapters of the novel, I would never see my way past those first 5 chapters. So I said to myself, all right, these first 5 chapters are going to get rewritten after I write the rest of this book. Anyway, so plotzing seems to be, I'm going to never stop saying plotzing. My cadre of Jewish speculative fiction writers that I've recently discovered on Twitter, they will all come with me on the plotzing journey. And everyone is welcome on the plotzing journey. I didn't mean that as an exclusion, because hey, if you want to plots, let's plots. Maybe that's the podcast's new tagline. Right podcast. If you want to plots, let's plots.
I like that. Watch out for the panther.
Oh yeah, watch out for the panther. Don't plots.
And I wanted to just add in on that sort of fear that you had about with plotting, and like you start to veer off in other directions, and that kind of stops you from writing. I've been in that place before, and so like that is a legitimate fear. A lot of writers probably won't admit it, but it's a legitimate fear. That's sort of why I've transitioned to this plotting 3 or 4 scenes at a time, because I've been in that place where like the whole second half of my outline I have to throw out because this character that I featured, he died. So, like, I can't do the rest of my plot. So I had to write my outline as I went, always keeping a couple of steps ahead just so I know where I need to sort of head, what direction I need to sort of head in. But that's definitely a fear, so don't feel silly for having that fear.
So I haven't read it yet, but it sounds a lot like that piece of advice is aligned with the 2K to 10K philosophy, of like knowing what you're going to write before you write it. Like that doesn't necessarily imply having a detailed outline, but knowing where you're headed in the immediate future is a great way to kickstart your writing for the day. Because otherwise you have to sit there and contemplate it for a while. But if you've made yourself a note like John does the day before, or like you do, Craig, with your 3 steps ahead outline, or like I never do because I'm bad at that, then you have a great... It's like instead of starting in quicksand, you've given yourself like a podium that you can run off of, which is great. So like minor low key plotting before getting started. I like that. I like that a lot. Like a mellow plots. You were gonna say something before I interrupted you with my nonsense, John.
Oh, I was going to say we definitely should have a follow-up episode just on how to keep your novel from veering off track and dealing with some of these difficulties, because I think it's definitely something we could all discuss and talk more about. But with regard to the struggles you're describing, I'm reminded of like I had that for the first 2 that I wrote, and because I approached it purely discovery. And when you're first writing a novel, even the first couple times, like I think a good metaphor is making pancakes. Like the first few will be all warped and messed up because you're heating the pan up.
I made pancakes this morning, and they were a disaster until I hit my groove.
There you go, right? I don't think you ever get like the first one perfect unless you're lucky. But usually the pan's calibrating, you're figuring out everything. And novel writing is a lot like that too, because the idea of what do I write next and what's your process. Like I think it was like the second novel that I wrote, just like a first draft. This one actually never made it past first draft. It's sitting in a box somewhere still. And I wrote this one by hand just because I had to convince myself that I could get through this. I had this magical thinking that, if I write it in my hand, I'll get it done, right? And I did that. See, I did that with my first novel, and because I made it to the end, I thought I had to repeat the magic. That's another thing. As a writer, I saw a lot of writers will fall into processes, and I think you're smart if you can break out of that. Yes, keep what works for you, but always try new things, especially as you get ideas. I went in a circle because I'm pantsing this. The idea I wanted to touch on is like making notes. So in my second book I wrote, I realized that, hey, I'm always like, something happens that I don't plan to happen, and I was getting close to the end, and I had ideas of where it was going to go. So I started writing notes on cue cards, and every time I would write, I left them out on the table where I was writing, and that helped me a lot. And that was the beginning of thinking maybe there's something to some kind of plotting. And so I think that as you write, the more you do it, you get a sense of the choices you're going to make and how to, what kind of braces you need to have in place to keep yourself going. But I definitely think we could talk about this for whole episode.
Yeah, we might need to come back to plotting and pantsing individually. There's so much to be said. I've built an idealized vision of what plotting is. Like I've seen so many people, and this is like the curse and the blessing of social media, and the social web. Like I've seen images of people who are really heavy plotters with they've set up a cork board on a wall in their office, and they have hundreds of index cards that are color coordinated and are organized in the most incredible mosaic that is just like, this is my story. And then I've seen pictures of people's desks covered in paper looking like a sty, and they're like, I know every single one of these pieces of paper and I need it this way so that I can discover my way through my story. we've said this over and over again. It's just kind of whatever works for you, and pick and choose from people. Like maybe a few index cards among your chaotic ream, just sort of splayed on your desk. Maybe it's maybe you're gonna tattoo your body like the movie Memento. Like whatever it is, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't do that. I don't know. I'm confident that if I really, really stick to plotzing, I will write good things. Because, for instance, I wrote a short story recently where I knew exactly what I wanted the ending to be like, I knew what I wanted a moment in the middle to be like, and I knew what I wanted the beginning to be like. And that was a rarity for me, to know exactly those 3 moments. And I didn't know what was going to happen between them, but I knew that I wanted to get there. And so I held them up as these 3 pillars, these 3 beats that I really wanted to hit. The story ended up being about 5,300 words. And to be honest, I'm very proud of it, because it got there. And it's because I had this guidepost. I was like, okay, so I can see where I am at point A. I know where point B is. I'm just going to walk. And I'm heading towards point B, but I might take a meandering route. I might take a direct route. I might go through a crazy dark forest, and I might go through Unicorn Funland. We do not know until we get there, until we take the journey. And that was my first sort of like plotting experience, and it was kind of intoxicating, and I really want to try it again for longer form work. Incidentally, that's why I reached out to this large group, because I was like, okay, I need all of your input so that I can know the best way to approach this 50,000 word novel that I'm going to be writing in this November. I have a premise. I have what I think is a really cool setting and character idea that's going to be really challenging for me to write and is going to be a really cool setting to explore. I want to know exactly the key moments before I sit down to write the very first day of NaNoWriMo, so that I'm not doing that thing where I'm trying to push my way out of a quagmire, out of some quicksand, just to get started writing. Because it's incredibly frustrating to be sitting there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, being like, I wonder what should happen now.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're way past time.
Is a tough spot.
Yeah.
That's another episode too.
What happens now?
There you go. I write this down.
I'm watching you do it in the Google Doc right now. You are Anonymous Manatee.
Oh, I'm a manatee. I'm not a panther?
No, you're a manatee now.
It's panther, right?
So we kind of talked about the final prompt the entire episode. So do you want to formalize it, John, or should we leave our listeners guessing about where this is going to go?
Well, I think, I think we could do that and leave them to discover it. But I just wanted to challenge our listeners to whatever your method is, especially if you're hardly defined in say either discovery writing or plotting, try the exact opposite. Just try it out. You don't necessarily have to stop your novel and do the opposite method and then write a new one, but just try adopting some of those techniques and see how you can mix them with your process. I mean, even a 2,000 word short story. Try outlining one. Try discovery writing one. There you go. That's a great idea. That's something short, because then you can see with shorter things you can experiment a lot more. Mm-hmm. But even if you're writing a novel and you're midway through and you've been using this outline all the way through, just try discovery writing. Mm-hmm. Some of stuff. You can use your notes, but try letting go of it a bit and see if some of the choices you make end up like being the right choice that totally surprises you. And a lot of times what surprises readers are twists. They don't see it coming, and you don't get a lot of that from plotting. You get most of that from you're in the story and it's going this one direction, and you say, you know what, I'm going to do this. Yeah, take a 90-degree turn. We're going to just do it. Right. So see where it takes you.
That's an awesome prompt. I'm excited for our many listeners to go out and do this. One final bit of business, I suppose, before we close out the episode. By the time this episode launches, our website should be up, rightrightpodcast.com. It is almost done as of this recording, but I imagine it will be done by then. So visit us at rightrightpodcast.com. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Google Play, or via RSS on the website and get deliveries whenever we post a new episode. So that's rightrightpodcast.com, your weekly pep talk on living the writing life. Come plots with me. Wait, what was the other one?
Watch out for the panther.
What?